Here we want to look at what is happening on the personal income side, but also hone in on real estate, especially when you look at some of the commentary out of the Fed today. You know, some of the comments have been a bit more hawkish, which I think is the right move, or at least is what the market is expecting. Obviously, we've had a bit of a reversal today from the highs, but I don't think there's anything shocking when you consider, you know, the dual mandate, you know, where they sit right now and what the pressure could be going forward. Now, when you look at real personal income, you know, ex-government transfers, the recovery is obviously much faster versus the great financial crisis. But it should be, because a lot of this was a bit man-made. You know, we forced people to not move around. And so you have a certain amount, and then obviously we dumped an ungodly amount of money into the market. So, but when you look at higher inflation, it's moved sideways and started to roll over. And that's the pressure that we're talking about. Those are the things where you're seeing that time and time again, where wages just are struggling, where in the previous segment, we talked about some of those leading indicators. What are wage expectations? And you're starting to see that dry up a bit and some of those concerns becoming real. Now, when you look at the cash balances as a percent of consumer credit by education, you can see, in a reversal of the decade-long decline, Americans of all education levels have seen substantial increase in cash relative to debt. That is still something that has been carried over from all of the money that was pushed in 2020, 2021, but we're starting to see that reverse again. So again, that's another little pressure point that is pointing to something a bit higher. And that's, again, just something to consider, because it will be an overhang as that excess liquidity essentially goes back to paying down this debt or managing the debt, as we have seen credit debt increase, which we've been talking about in other shows. Now, we've also had a big shift in migration. To no one's surprise, we've had an increase in Florida, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, essentially the Carolinas and Tennessee, and the biggest movement out of California and New York. So a lot of the movement has been done. We've already seen the shift. We've already seen the pivot. The question is, what comes next? And that's where we see some of the pressure points, especially when you look at mortgage-backed securities taking the brunt of the reduction. That's going to bring interest rates back down. You're starting to see the more concern about inflation. How is inflation being managed? And I think that is some of the additional factors that are going to weigh on what activity looks like and what rates look like, as well as what home prices look like. So January consumer confidence came in at 113.8 versus the estimate of 111. So expectations fell to 90.8 versus 95.4. Present situation rose a bit from to 148.2 versus 144 prior. Spread between the latter pair remains deeply negative. So there's still, the concerns still are out there, especially when you look at where is inflation, where are rates, what's my wage going to look like, what is going to happen. Where right now you're like, all right, well, things aren't too bad. You know, Omicron is getting better. You know, I know people that had it. It was a bad cold for many. So let's get back to normal. But what is normal? And that's when you start looking at the real economy and some of these leading indicators and the pressure that remains in the system. So then when you look at the consumer confidence index contributors, you can see that what created the pressure is future income, future business, present business. So you're starting to see that weigh down what expectations are, where some of this flow is going to happen from. And that's, I think, a bigger overhang that is going to be important, especially on the income side, as inflation continues to bite, continues to go up. And how are people going to offset that inflationary pressure? So all of this is happening. At the meantime, consumer confidence is also dipping as activity is falling. Activity is falling due to pricing, due to, you know what, Omicron, I'm gonna give it a second. You may be quarantining. I know we had to quarantine the second week of December. I know a lot of people that still have to quarantine because they're either at the end of having COVID in the household or just had COVID over the last couple of days. But again, this is something that is going to see a fairly sizable snapback on activity as we go into March and April. But what is that going to do for confidence? Or do prices run ahead of it, and where people should be getting excited, should be seeing a bit more activity, we don't actually get it because we are seeing a lot of pressure on the inflation front and wages. So then when you look at retail and inventories, so massive upswing in retail inventories in December, up 4.4% versus a 1.5% estimate. this is what we were saying. And it's a mixture of two things. And as we highlighted it, it was supply chains got a bit better, retail consumer slowed down. So the fact that stuff showed up faster than you were expecting and people didn't buy as much all led to an increase in inventories, which is going to be a positive contributor to Q4 GDP, but it's lumpy and it's not something that's going to show up in Q1, or it won't show up to the same degree. And then how much does the consumer slowing in December offset this? That's where you have fun with numbers and you get all these estimates of what Q4 GDP growth will be. So then when you look in consumers, this is looking at a Langer index. So the Langer U.S. Weekly Consumer Comfort Index has dropped significantly from the post-pandemic peak in August 2021 and is at the lowest since June 2020, to give you an idea of the confidence people have and what are some of the concerns in the market right now. Now, in-stock levels, if for those that have been in the grocery store, there's a lot of shortages that continue to kind of roll through. It's lumpy. Sometimes things will run out. Then it's just a matter of not only supply chain caused by COVID, caused by shortages, but also weather. I mean, if they shut down the highway, you're not getting this stuff through for several days. So we've seen a lot of storms, we've seen a lot of pressure points, which again continue to weigh on some of these underlying impacts. And again, some of these pressure points with supply of food in U.S. retail stores getting hit by Omicron and its ripple effect, employees out sick, and supply chain delays have contributed to lower in-stock levels, mixed in some pretty terrible winter weather, and there you have it. So, but now when you look at housing, so there's obviously the Fed, there's bringing down home prices, there's raising rates, there's no longer buying mortgage-backed securities, but there's also volume. There's also what is in the works, what is in the pipeline. So there's still a significant amount of housing that is being built. So, and if you think about it, typically 16 to 18 month lead on housing start and copper consumption would imply that demand stays elevated longer than expected, but it's also volume that's going to come to market. So it'll be supportive of some of the commodities in general because there's some of these pressure points, but we have to look at what happens when these homes come on. I know by me, every home has been torn down and quadrupled in size because everybody wants a bigger home, more space, more bedrooms, home office. But how much of that is how much of this volume is going to hit at the same time, and who is that buyer? Now, when we look at new home sales were much stronger in December, 11.9% versus the estimate of 2.2%. Monthly growth rate was the fastest since July 2020. Median new home price up 3.4%. to $377,700. Average selling price at $457,300. Month supply at 6 months versus 6.6. So as we've been talking about, there's been a lot of these delays. So new home sales are there, still happening, but the look at where it is versus the peak. And I think the biggest tell is, what does March, April, and May look like? Are we getting this acceleration, or are we getting a bite of new homes coming to market, mortgage-backed security sales down, rates have been increased at least 25 to 50 basis points, depending on which month between March and May? What happens? And I think that's going to put some of that, a little bit of that cold water on it. And here's part of the reason. So median home price for existing homes has climbed again to new record in the South, Northeast, and Midwest are off their peaks, and West has flatlined. So the Northeast, I think, is going to be a bigger piece on the flatlining side, because you're starting to see some of that roll over. And a lot of that Northeast has been driven not by New England, New York, New Jersey, but the Carolinas, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, and Florida. So as this starts to roll, how much of that pressure continues to roll through? So on a year-over-year basis, U.S. rents rose most on record in December. Apartment List had it up 17.8%. Zillow had it up 15.7%. And Yardi had it up 13.5%. So you're getting an idea of rents have increased, and it's all just what are rents? And this is the CPI. This is the owner equivalent rent. This is the pressure that we look at when we talk about sticky inflation and a lot of these pressure points. Home price growth still strong, but rolling over slightly. CASE-SHILLER U.S. home price index came in at 18.8% in November, down from 19% in December. 18.3% year over year versus 18.5% in December. All 20 cities had price increases over the prior year. But again, starting to peak as we go into slowing of mortgage-backed security buying. Again, all of these things are leading to some of that pressure. All the while, when you look at inflation, housing inflation, U.S. single-family rent growth increased 11.5% in November 2021, the fastest year-over-year increase in over 16 years, according to CORELOGIC. So I don't care what metric you use. I just gave you five, but are you seeing anything? Low tier, SFRI, low tier, low middle tier, high tier. All of this is going higher, again, leading to that pressure point that we've talked about with inflation. And when you look at the observed rent index rose on record for Zillow to $1,855. So how are wages keeping up? How are living costs keeping up? When you look at food, when you look at medical, all of these pieces continue. And as we showed, you're talking about rent being over 35% of the CPI calculation and going higher, which again leads to a lot of these pressure points. And how is the consumer going to continue to be able to spend at the same rate given a lot of these underlying issues? Now, this is the divergence between existing home price gains and depletion of supply. So the latter has fallen to new lows, as it would now only take 1.8 months to sell all homes on the market. But the market isn't stagnant. And as we showed last week, there's a huge divergence between new builds and completions. And so that's where we see some of this volume being made up. Now we look at existing home sales. So December existing home sales fell 4.6% versus 0.5% estimate. Medium selling price up 15.8% to $358,000 versus $354,000. At current pace, it would take only 1.8 months to sell all the homes on market, but it's slowing. So new homes are still there. You're still seeing that pressure, but we're starting to see some cracks into this. Given it's December, it's a lumpy month, but that's why the spring side is going to be very important to see how much of this continues into key buying periods. And this is, I think, the biggest problem to date. December housing starts and permits show an uptick for overall units that haven't been started. Yet single-family units rolled over and haven't yet jumped beyond the financial crisis levels. So not started totals are still there, and this is backlog. This is inventory that's going to come to market. So then when you look at the number of houses under construction, still outpacing completions by a significant degree, spread is most negative in history, which again, when does this come to market and how much pressure does that put on pricing? Because the issue is where do prices go? You know, we know where prices have been, we know where they are today, but where are they going to be as the moratorium ends? You know, new volume comes to market, mortgage rates go up. This is where we see this pressure point, and some of the key things that we've been talking about and that we've been highlighting. Now, when you look at the shortage of product category, so this is why we've had so many delays. You know, lumber isn't the same issue. Windows, I don't know if you've looked at glass, but good luck trying to find it because glass shortages are insane. And it comes down to concrete. Concrete has sand. Windows have sand. There's a big problem with some of these different pressure points, and this is resulting in additional delays, which is why we continue to see completions take so long. But as this clears up, as this catches up with itself, that's when we'll have some of this new volume come to market. Now, December housing starts, again, up 1.4% versus the estimate of negative 1.7%. So you're continuing to see that. Building permits came in at positive 9.1% versus an estimate of negative 0.8%. Housing completions were down negative 8.7% versus 13%. This is why we keep talking about permits are there, building is there, completions aren't. And as those completions come through, that's just going to be new volume that's going to hit the market, and it'll hit it pretty hard, in my opinion. So then when you look at 12-month cost of purchasing in the median home, the 20% down payment, as we all know, has exploded. Total cost continues to go up. And this is why when you look at mortgage payments, we expect mortgage payments to continue to drift higher, continue to put that pressure. And those are some of the key pieces that we've been watching and we are cautious on. So that's what we have for you on where things go. And I think the mortgage rates are going to be key, especially as the Fed accelerates or slows down their purchases of mortgage-backed securities. And that's going to put some of that pressure into the market as a whole. So now in the next segment, we're going to look at Europe. What are some of the things that we're seeing in Europe and some of those leading indicators, and then round it out in the last segment with obviously Asia.